A historic ceasefire, the release of hostages from Gaza and prisoners from Israel. And President Trump says his 20-point plan will lead to a new day in the Middle East. But the peace is fragile. An international force must be formed to maintain security and restore the economy. And the massive rebuilding effort could take years. Welcome to Sunday Briefing. I'm Colleen Marshall. After 2 years of unrelenting war, the Israeli and Palestinian people are holding on to hope for sustained peace. But peace is much more elusive in Ukraine, at war with Russia for nearly 4 years, with Ukrainians inside and outside the country resisting the invasive force. Just this week, the government of Vladimir Putin released a list of 23 names identified as enemies of state because of alleged subversive activities. Most of them are members of the anti-war committee, formed just after Russia invaded Ukraine. On that list, a man who came to fame in Russia as a journalist, forced from his homeland because of resistance to Putin. But this week, Capital University brought him here to Ohio, and I sat down with him hours after the New York Times reported on the list of alleged subversives, dissidents, and that includes his name, Yevgeny Kiselyev.
On Tuesday, announced a sweeping terrorism investigation into nearly 24 anti-war Russians.
Yevgeny Kiselyev is now making news instead of just delivering it. He found himself on the Russian enemies list hours after the Middle East declaration of peace. Peace that's eluding the people of Russia and Ukraine. They have to be thinking, where is our peace? Where's the end to this war?
Well, let's wait and see if peace really comes into Middle East. I'm very skeptical about the prospects of peace in the Middle East and in Israel especially. What I'm seeing is a picture of continuing violence by Hamas, executions.
Kiselyev is a skeptic because he is still a journalist, still pursuing truth. He hosted one of the most popular political programs in Russia, and in the 90s was one of the founders of what was known in Russia as NTV, a free-to-air Russian broadcasting network. He was the Tom Brokaw of Russia at a time of relative freedom in Moscow. But then Putin came to power, and NTV had a political satire puppet show that enraged the Russian leader because it had a Putin puppet.
They insisted that we close this puppet show, and especially we do not, or at least do not show the puppet of Vladimir Putin. Otherwise, we are in big trouble. We resisted, we refused to close the show. We continued to produce programs with Putin's puppet, and it all ended very bad for us, very badly.
Putin's military took the network by force, and Kiselyev's resistance eventually led to his exile from Russia to Ukraine. And that's where he met a young performer by the name of Volodymyr Zelensky.
Well, he was a very capable television manager, a very talented comedian.
And Zelensky was part of a program, a political satire, about a school teacher suddenly elected president of Ukraine after one of his internet reels goes viral.
I think that if the show was a failure, then he would never even think of entering big politics, big-time politics.
Kiselyev believes Zelensky has been good for Ukraine, but Ukraine needs more. He has watched protesters around the world demanding freedom for Palestine, wondering who will stand up for Ukraine.
And no demonstrations in support of Ukrainian fight against Russian aggression. And too many European politicians are thinking about returning back to normalcy, returning back to business as usual with Russia. Too many people telling us that sooner or later Putin will end this war. I cannot see any end to this war, and I don't see that Putin is really willing to end the war. Thousands and thousands and thousands of Russians are being killed, and they are serving Putin as cannon fodder, and nothing is changing. Nothing is changing.
When you hear Donald Trump saying that he can negotiate with Putin, that Putin admires him, what's your reaction to that?
Wishful thinking. It's wishful thinking, no more. I think that Putin understands only force. When probably he will back down if and when Donald Trump tells him, look, if you don't stop the war, I shall arm Ukrainians with Tomahawk cruise missiles, and those cruise missiles are going to hit your capital, Moscow, your centers of power. Then you will be in big trouble.
Kisilov says Americans also need to safeguard freedom. What has happened to late-night talk show hosts like Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert remind him of Putin rising to power and silencing free speech.
Never forget that freedom of speech is the oxygen of democracy. Free media, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, free newspapers, internet, television, they are the oxygen of freedom, oxygen of democracy. That's number one. Number two, do not trust Putin. Never trust Putin. Putin understands only sheer power, only force. You will never get him under the table of real peaceful negotiations. And probably number three, support Ukraine, because they are fighting a just war against Russian aggressors. It's the biggest war in Europe since World War II.
When we come back, a new poll probes lawmakers at the State House on safety and partisanship. We'll show you what the numbers reveal after the break. What do Ohio lawmakers really believe about the policies they will vote on when they are answering questions anonymously? That's what the Gongwer-Worth legislative poll seeks to answer. The polls were put together at various times over the past 4 years by the Gongwer News Service and the Worth Public Affairs Group. The latest poll focuses on safety and rhetoric. The partisan divide glaringly evident in questions of whether the tone of the U.S. political climate affects lawmakers in Ohio. 100% of Democrats say yes, compared to only 44% for Republicans. And a decisive 93% of Democrats disagree with national leaders who advance partisanship at times of tragedy. 38% of Republicans disagree, but 23% say it's harmful but understandable, something likely easier to admit anonymously.
So lawmakers have the freedom to say what they actually think and to actually share what they actually believe in a way that they may not feel as comfortable doing so if their name was on it.
Most lawmakers feel very safe or somewhat safe at the State House.
I think what was interesting that we were learned is that among Republicans, they feel a little safer in their own districts than they do at the State House.
And that leads to the next poll question.
We've heard over the years, there have been people saying, well, if people are allowed to carry guns in parks, why can't they carry them in the State House?
77% of Republicans say lawmakers should be allowed to be armed. 87% of Democrats say they should not. All of it a window into how lawmakers think.
Because, I mean, as you know, Colleen, there are a lot of people whose jobs it is to try to figure out, how do I appeal to these folks? I have an issue that I need to take to them. How do I appeal to them?
Is a 10-year-old too young to be put behind bars? Right now in Ohio, children as young as 10 can be incarcerated, but that could soon change. Governor DeWine created a juvenile justice reform working group to take a look at how Ohio handles its youngest offenders. The bipartisan group came before the Judicial Committee at the State House and the Senate with 3 recommendations for Ohio lawmakers.
First of all, is to raise the minimum age for youth commitment to the Department of Youth Services from 10 to 14 years of age. Can you imagine a 10-year-old being sentenced to a correctional facility? Then secondly, it would allow for more judicial discretion when sentencing youth who are adjudicated of a gun specification.
Senator Paula Hicks Hudson is the Democrat co-chairing the working group. She says the third recommendation is to prohibit nonviolent first-time offenders from being placed into facilities.
Trying to keep, our kids out of that system so that they don't become more criminalized.
Hicks Hudson and her Republican counterpart, Senator Nathan Manning, took their recommendations to the Senate Judicial Committee.
But unfortunately, oftentimes when we come out with recommendations, there's no action taken by the General Assembly.
They want action that would give juvenile judges more sentencing discretion.
Juveniles are different than adults. Certainly, many of these, violations or, crimes are very serious, and, incarceration is certainly appropriate, but we want to leave that up to the judge's discretion.
Hicks Hudson says the recommendations are aimed at saving the child instead of incarcerating them.
What we have to do with young people that are involved in these kinds of criminal behaviors is to give them alternatives, and locking them up isn't going to do that. I think more importantly, not only that the kid, but also bringing that parent along with them.
Hicks Hudson says the changes are rooted in the belief that children can be rehabilitated and their behaviors can change.
And we have to understand that what you did at the age of 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 should not define who you are at the age of 35. But if we don't intervene sooner rather than later, you're going to have a 16-year-old who's going to spend 2 years in a juvenile system and then be transferred to an adult system because we didn't get to them earlier.
There were 11 members on that committee, including judges, lawmakers, and faith leaders. A public hearing must be held on those recommendations. After the break, is there a chance the U.S. could arm Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles? Our experts weigh in when we come back. Welcome back, everyone. On our roundtable this week, we have with us a Republican strategist, Matt Dole, and a Democrat strategist, former lawmaker Lou Gentile, back with us. And earlier in this program, we heard from an exiled Russian journalist who really is very skeptical, not only about peace lasting in the Middle East, but about coming to any kind of a peaceful agreement with Vladimir Putin, who he knows, who he has been under. He believes that the United States, if Donald Trump says we are sending in Tomahawk missiles, it's the only thing that Vladimir Putin will pay attention to. How realistic is it to think, or for him to think, that the United States might do something like that, Matt?
Well, first of all, it's shocking that Hamas and Israel have made peace, or Palestine and Israel have made peace. And that's not even the biggest problem in the world today. It's Vladimir Putin who's really, I think, the bigger problem. And I do think that Putin is playing a little bit with Donald Trump. He's a negotiator the way Donald Trump is a negotiator. But I think Trump will see through that, and I think there is a chance that Ukraine gets the support they want.
Do you think that's realistic, that they would send Tomahawk missiles? That is something the United States has resisted up to this point.
Listen, I think it's important to unify all of the Western democracies around Ukraine, and I think they should provide them with as much equipment and military firepower as necessary to defend themselves. And I regret that the Trump administration has walked back from that. They delayed aid for many, many months. President Trump has continually said that Vladimir Zelensky started the war, when we know that's a lie. That's not true. So I think a lot of what this administration has done is undermine and actually rolling out the red carpet for Putin is not something he responds to, right? He responds, I think, to toughness and to force. And to bring him to Alaska, roll out the red carpet, I think, is in a lot of ways elevated him and sort of was harmful, I think, to the cause. We had him isolated in the previous administration. We should have kept him there. So I'm hopeful that we were a little bit stronger and tougher on Russia heading into the coming months.
I want to ask both of you as well about another thing that we had earlier in this program. It's the Gongwer-Worth poll, which is always interesting because lawmakers can answer this poll anonymously. You kind of get what they think. And it certainly looks as if a lot of Republicans favor having firearms in the State House, that lawmakers should be armed. This is not surprising, I guess, from the Republican Party, but they have the power right now. How realistic is it, do you think, that we'll see that vote anytime soon?
I'll say two things. First of all, the poll suggested that people think Republicans could be armed rather than should be armed, right? It's like teachers in schools. This isn't arm everybody. This is if you're trained and you're comfortable, having a firearm is interesting. The second thing I'll say is 11% of Democrats also supported that, which is a high number in my mind. I was expecting to see that number lower.
Yeah, especially when they were 100% on some of the other issues. Yeah. This is a real possibility, isn't it?
I don't know about the likelihood of that. As somebody who had a good record, I had a very good Second Amendment record as a legislator. I didn't always buy the argument that like you having a gun necessarily made sure I was safe. Hopefully you know how to use that weapon. One of the things
especially me. Yeah.
One of the things from the poll that I saw that concerned me was that folks don't feel safe in their districts, that they're starting to feel less safe in their districts, and it's something I don't ever recall ever having to worry about walking around my district and not feeling safe.
We've seen a lot of violence against lawmakers around the country, so I don't find that surprising, although one thing that was interesting is that Republicans feel safer in their districts than they do at the State House. So that's also something to think about. Hey, when we come back, we're going to talk about, our favorite topic. When will the government shutdown end? We'll be right back. Guess what? The government shutdown is still ongoing, and both sides are digging in their heels. Democrats are saying we will not vote to reopen government without health care subsidies being supported. And Republicans are saying we will not vote to end this shutdown unless that's not a discussion. They're not ready to do anything. Neither side is ready to blink. So what's going to happen? Who should blink first?
Well, it's not just Democrats that are talking about the need to preserve the affordable care subsidies. It's also one of the big-time MAGA darlings, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is also saying my party needs to get in line and do something about healthcare costs, not just healthcare costs, but the overall rising cost of living. One of the things Donald Trump said he was going to do when elected was bring down the cost of living. But costs have gone up, freedoms have gone down right now in this administration.
But this shutdown is all about the healthcare. And do you think Republicans should blink? Who should blink?
I will say this. Republicans have not voted to keep the government closed. Republicans have voted to clean CR 10 times in the Senate and passed it in the House. And the government can be open now if Democrats vote for it. Republicans have said, once we do that, once we pass a clean CR and get another few weeks out of an open government, we're happy to have that conversation about health care. And I think there's a lot of Republicans that do want to have that conversation because the Affordable Care Act has proven to not be affordable.
But the Republicans control the White House. They control both chambers in Congress. And Donald Trump himself said before he was president, if there's a shutdown, that's on the president. And instead of meeting with Congress, he's meeting with the dictator of Argentina to provide him a $40 billion bailout at the expense of our soybean farmers.
Yeah, soybean farmers, we've heard from them this week. We're going to be hearing more from farmers and also people who think their health care is at risk and people who are saying, the Republicans are right, let's get back to work. So we will be talking about this, of course, and keeping an eye on what's happening in Washington and at the State House. And we'll talk about it next week on Sunday Briefing.